This past January, conservative media outlets kept linking Al Gore with the apocalypse. There were headlines like Countdown to Gore Apocalypse, Apocalypse Delayed, and in direct reference to what had initiated interest in this particular pairing, Limbaugh's Al Gore Armageddon clock about to hit zero after 10 years. On his January 4th, 2016 show, Limbaugh reminded his audience of how this countdown had started by rereading the transcript from his January 27th, 2006 show.
Try this one from yesterday's stack. I don't know if you people know this or not, but Al Gore's been out at the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah. He's working on a movie, Inconvenient Truth. The movie will document his efforts to raise alarm and the effects of global warming, so he brought Tipper and the kids out there, attending parties, posting for pictures with his fans, enjoying macaroni and cheese at the Discovery Channel soiree, palling around with Laurie David of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David, husband of Larry David. And he said that we've got 10 years left. This followed Ted Danson's 10-year prediction in 1988 that we only had 10 years to save the oceans. And that if we failed to save the oceans in 10 years, that would mean the end of humanity, essentially. Well, that 10-year anniversary came and went. So we decided to start the Al Gore countdown clock. Right there on the front page at rushlimbaugh.com. You may have to scroll down to see it, but it's always been there.
Now, besides the fact that Limbaugh keeps having trouble with the relationship between producer Laurie David and comedian Larry David, it's of note that Limbaugh was drawing directly, verbatim even, from a January 26, 2006 Washington Post piece about the Sundance premiere of An Inconvenient Truth. But in this article, Gore's supposed only 10 years left prophecy actually appears within an authorial paraphrase. The following day, the day Limbaugh launched his over-the-top countdown clock, an article ran in the Philadelphia Daily News that offered further explanation of where this doomsday claim originated. Now, says Gore, unless drastic measures to reduce greenhouse gases are taken within the next 10 years, the world will reach the point of no return, a true planetary emergency. Which is to say that far from declaring that a climate change apocalypse would destroy our world by January 27, 2016, what Al Gore actually seems to have been arguing in 2006 is that, barring substantial and comprehensive changes, time will only exacerbate the negative effects of climate change. But even if in this instance Al Gore wasn't using apocalyptic rhetoric to empower his message, he certainly has. Gore functions within Eileen Christ's observation that climate change works do not employ the word apocalypse, but they often imply or outright describe something that uncannily resembles what religious imagery has pictured. In An Inconvenient Truth, Gore pauses from his predictions of what unchecked CO2 will do to the planet to reflect on the chaos and destruction Hurricane Katrina dealt New Orleans. A montage of broadcast segments confronts viewers with the realities of trauma's past. At times, Gore depicts the possible future as being just as grim. In this clip, Gore weaves the emotional baggage associated with September 11th into the possible tragedies increased water levels would incur upon the citizens of Manhattan.
But this is what would happen to Manhattan. They can measure this precisely, just as the scientists could predict precisely how much water would breach the levees in New Orleans. The area where the World Trade Center Memorial is to be located would be underwater.
This particular moment plays out like a direct reworking of Roland Emmerich's 2004 global disaster flick, The Day After Tomorrow. These kinds of apocalyptic motifs have run through Gore's other presentations. In his talk at the 2008 TED Conference, he included this segment of civilization literally falling into an abyss.
Already around the Arctic Circle, this is a famous village in Alaska. This is a town in Newfoundland.
And in his most recent appearance at TED in February of 2016, he had this to say.
Record downpours are creating historic floods and mudslides. This one is from Chile last year, and you'll see that warehouse going by, their oil tanker cars going by. This is from Spain last September. You could call this the running of the cars and trucks, I guess. Every night on the TV news now is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation.
When it comes to the discourse surrounding climate change, both the committed activists and the political critics draw from the same sources. Apocalypse runs through both sides of this conversation. Apocalyptic references and images that directly evoke Revelation chapter 6 or 8 or 16. Michael Barkun has written about the extent to which apocalypse as the belief that the accepted texture of reality is about to undergo a staggering transformation has broken off from exclusively religious contexts and been embraced within secular ideologies. Apocalypse has become such a dominant narrative force within environmental discourse that scholars have divided its most common trajectories into 3 acts. The first 2, humans living in harmony with nature, then humans turning against nature, focus on history, and the last act depicts either an inevitable catastrophe or a tragedy averted through activism. So, the perfection fall and end of the world is a motif reciprocally employed by both environmentalists and climate change skeptics. Catherine Keller reflects that, quote, the apocalyptic tone of corporate denunciations of the apocalyptic tone of ecology contributes to a rhetorical warming cycle, unquote. A cycle that has only grown in intensity. Matthew Barrett Gross and Mel Gills are concerned that applications of apocalyptic rhetoric by, quote, both the proponents and opponents of human-made climate change have led us down a cul-de-sac of conversation by exploiting the apocalyptic metaphor to make their case. And what has apocalypse given us? Dire warnings that get written off as crackpot prophecies? Have the 2 applications of apocalypse canceled each other out? Climate change remains a disputed and politically driven topic. Recently, the U.S. Supreme Court blocked President Obama's attempts to limit national production of greenhouse gases. According to recent Pew Research data, only 20% of Republicans say that global climate change is a very serious problem. In trying to make sense of how increased talk of apocalypse has paired with rising trends of skepticism and declining concern about its effect, Ted Nordhaus and Michael Schellenberger have wondered if apocalyptic threats, when their impacts are relatively far off in the future, difficult to imagine or visualize, and emanate from everyday activities, not an external and hostile force, are not easily acknowledged and are unlikely to become priority concerns for most people. Interestingly, all 3 of these points get manifested differently within Gore's and Limbaugh's apocalyptic rhetoric. Limbaugh's mocking countdown clock pushes the possible catastrophe into the future, but Gore's most consistent applications of apocalyptic rhetoric do not. For Gore, the tragedy is already here. Climate change trauma is a present reality, not just a future possibility. He shows pictures from Hurricane Katrina and collapsing houses and last summer's floods. According to Gore, the imagery from Revelation is being revealed all around us, right now. Gore's tactic of focusing not just on the future, but also on the present, additionally subverts Nordhaus and Schellenberger's concern that the apocalyptic rhetoric makes the threats, quote, difficult to imagine or visualize, unquote. When faced with these images of present droughts and destruction, imagination is unnecessary. Limbaugh's clock, on the other hand, is pure, over-the-top abstraction. Its primary graphic, lifted from promotional material for Michael Bay's 1998 movie Armageddon, is not grounded in any kind of reality. Although this imagery does directly recall an external threat, that is, a world-ending meteor, this is a ridiculous threat, a made-up threat, a summer blockbuster threat. Nothing about Limbaugh's send-up of Gore's concerns interacts with what is real, which fits directly with Limbaugh's parodic intent. So, Nordhaus and Schellenberger suggest that apocalyptic discourse in connection to the environment is rhetorically problematic because it pushes endings into the future, its catastrophes are abstractions, and its causes are too familiar to appear threatening. But if neither Limbaugh's nor Gore's implementation of the end map easily onto this framework, then how else might we understand their use of apocalypse? Nordhaus and Schellenberger fault an inconvenient truth for not balancing plentiful apocalyptic allusions with the millennial hope for restoration that grounds the religious narrative. Hope is present in the film, but it's relegated to a quick slideshow of humankind's recent triumphs and an afterthought list of simple things individuals can do to effect positive change. This criticism places Gore's rhetorical effect in league with the unrelieved misery that Eric Swingadow says is indicative of the, quote, present-day millennialism which preaches an apocalypse without the promise of redemption, unquote. Which sounds a lot like what Martin Jay identifies as a postmodern fascination with being on the verge of an end that never comes. Which is to say that as long as Gore's optimism falls flat and his apocalyptic vision is ultimately no more uplifting than Samuel Beckett's Endgame, he might be better off avoiding apocalypse altogether. But Laura Johnson doesn't think that Gore's paucity of hope is particularly unbalancing, since she finds that Gore's apocalypse isn't actually as strident as it could be. She claims that Gore utilizes a tempered apocalypse in an inconvenient truth, an end times rhetoric that is muted by attention paid to Gore's stories of personal loss and his reliance on scientific explanations. And if the apocalyptic quality of his 2006 message is tempered, then by 2016 he has become unapologetically millennial. The title of his 2016 TED Talk is The Case for Optimism on Climate Change. And he spends the last third of this presentation expounding on his assertions that we're going to win this, we're going to change. But do those assurances of hope ring true when they've been prefaced by so much apocalypse? Certainly, in evoking the apocalypse in order to make fun of its application, Limbaugh's countdown clock plays with the possibility of hope. He is confidently asserting a vision where the world isn't at risk of ending because, at worst, Gore is a dirty opportunist out to make millions off green investments, and at best, he's a crazy street-side prophet declaring that the end is nigh. Limbaugh's hope is grounded in his assertion that the climate is not changing. And Gore's hope? In 2008, he cast this vision.
I think we ought to approach this challenge with a sense of profound joy and gratitude that we are the generation about which 1,000 years from now, philharmonic orchestras and poets and singers will celebrate by saying they were the ones that found it within themselves to solve this crisis and lay the basis for a bright and optimistic human future.
Of course, Gore is clearly working here within tried and true tropes of epic inspiration.
Wonder if we'll ever be put into songs or tales. What?
And Gore's hope, just like the apocalyptic perspectives that precede it, is sweeping in scale. It's grand and larger than life, which makes it all feel like fiction. Gross and Gills find this fictive element of apocalyptic rhetoric's application to climate change, its fantastical quality, to be particularly troubling. The deeper we entangle the challenges of the 21st century with apocalyptic fantasy, the more likely we are to paralyze ourselves with inaction or with the wrong course of action. We react to the idea of apocalypse rather than to the underlying issues activating the apocalyptic storyline to begin with, either by denying its reality or by despairing at its inevitability. Given this, is conjuring the ballad-singing, world-saving hope of millennialism along with its apocalyptic precursor really the best means for motivating change? Eric Swindigau isn't sure that any of this is effective at all, as he wonders if we, academics, were to believe that the Earth is really in the dismal state we are told it is in, we would not be sitting around writing and reading arcane academic journal articles. And yet we are. Even though Al Gore tells us that the climate change apocalypse is now, but that the wonders of a new Jerusalem as realized through human ingenuity are still to come, while Rush Limbaugh draws upon that same religious and cultural imagery to, in a surprising turn, mollify fears, if only by ridiculing the one raising them. Apocalypse is a tool wielded by both sides as a means of fomenting argument, and whether or not it is the best tool, the most productive means of persuasion, its use is understandable. With these floods and these droughts and these computer models telling us that by 2100 the oceans will have taken over coastal cities, everything looks apocalyptic. Although, maybe this propensity to see in all of this the end of the world says more about our cultural moment than it does about the effectiveness of apocalyptic rhetoric. Are we so steeped in narratives of big, blowout conclusions, of ultimate endings, of fire and brimstone and last breath clarity that we view the world around us as one that is primed to die? It's as if we almost need climate change to be either an apocalypse or a non-apocalypse, in that either of these views can validate our own position, because through apocalypse, truth is unequivocally revealed. The saved are separated from the damned, and questions are irrevocably answered, and there is something appealing about that. But I'm not sure that it's realistic. If that level of absolute clarity hasn't dawned on civilization yet and prompted us to repent of our consumeristic ways, then why would we think that more references to apocalypse would change anything? Perhaps it's time to recognize that within climate change discourse, apocalypse has become too versatile, too familiar, too easily manipulated to serve as a productive ideological metaphor for the long-acting and long-lasting changes we're wrecking on our planet. Thank you.